So it's not to overwhelm you or to make it seem like you can never do any of these things, but just to give you a sense of what some of these things are that might be causing reactions and where you can go. And then we want to really focus on what you can do, and that's what today is all about. What good foods you can introduce, good ways you can get nutrients into your kids, good ways you can prepare foods that they like. So that's what we want to spend more time focused on. I know that that just the other part of this discussion is just a natural piece because there are things we often need to eliminate. But really what we want to do is then just go from there, just do your best with what you have, and just start to see. If they're doing great and they're totally thriving, then they might not have an issue with some of those foods that we brought up. I could take any food and tell you why it's bad. You could take greens and they're bad because you can't do them on an oxalate diet. So the point is not to restrict you or limit you, but just to give you plenty of knowledge so that you can help to determine, start to pinpoint where those things might be. Maybe there isn't hidden gluten. Maybe it is an oxalate or a phenol or something else. So we're just giving you lots of information so you can start to determine some of that for yourself and go from there. So I just wanted to say that. And then welcome to the second half of the day, which is on the specific carbohydrate diet and fermented foods. The fermented foods piece is going to, for the most part, be SED compliant and GFCF, so I will mention any time that there's some distinctions that are not. But we wanted to start out today by talking about making nut milk and then nut milk yogurt, and then we're going to use that in a smoothie that we're going to make. So I want to start with, why would you make your own nut milk? It's easy to do. Although it gets a little messy, and it's one more thing that you have to add to your busy schedule, so why bother when you can buy it in a container already made for you? Well, if you've never tried nut milk before, and we're not going to sample the nut milk, but we're going to sample the nut milk in the smoothie. Nut milk is homemade, is incredibly delicious. It's fresh, it's so tasty, and it tastes so different from what you get in the container at the store. So that's number one. Also, it is far more nutritious because you're going to have everything live and fresh. Third thing is that hopefully you're going to soak your nuts ahead of time, so you're going to remove all of those digestive inhibitors, and you're going to make a lot more nutritious, digestible food. So there's lots of reasons that while you could get it at the store, and like Susan said, it's good to have some on hand when you need it in an emergency, it is something that you will want to try and see how your family likes it and go from there. So with that said, we have some nuts that we have soaked ahead of time. So we soak them in some water, and usually for 7 to 24 hours. So this instruction, the almond milk recipe is not on here, so we're just going to tell you as we go. We then use that to make the yogurt. So usually what you'll do ahead of time is you're going to soak your nuts, whatever nuts they are. The other nice thing about making your own nut milk is that you can use whatever nuts you want. So if, for example, you can't do almonds because of phenols or some sensitivity, you can use hazelnuts, you can use Brazil nuts, you can use cashews, you can do any macadamia nuts, walnuts, you can use anything. And so for people that want to rotate their nuts so they don't create nut allergies, you don't have to go with just the almond milk or the almond milk and hazelnut that they sell at the store. You can now have various nuts that you can rotate by making your own nut milk. So from that, we started with the soaked nuts that we've then drained.
How long did you soak?
7 to 24 hours. Anywhere in that time frame is good.
And could I just say something about the whole soaking, and it sounds like how many steps. I do this regularly, so I buy almonds, I soak them before I go to bed at night, I wake up in the morning, they're ready. You know, it's not a big deal. I leave them on the counter, I don't refrigerate them, I just cover them with water, I dump that water out. In the morning I have soaked nuts ready to go. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, and then if I don't use all the nuts I soaked, I stick the soaked nuts in the refrigerator so that they don't...
Yes, otherwise they will get moldy.
That's
so
right.
You want to definitely, if you don't use them, refrigerate them. That's a really good point. And we're using blanched, slivered almonds today, but you do not need to do that.
No.
You can use just regular almonds, and that's fine.
They are raw.
Oh, let me actually, I should probably pour water in here. So that...
Right.
Correct. So you always want to, when you make your nut milks, you always want to use raw nuts.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
It's not for the recipe because you're going to then dump that water off, and as you can see here, we're going to use fresh water to make the nut milk itself.
So how much water did you put in?
I put 3 cups. So the recipe is 1 cup of nuts to 3 cups of water, and I usually, I don't know if you do this, I consider 1 cup of pre-soaked nuts, so because they will expand. So I use the 1 cup of dried that then will expand to a little bit more than actually 1 cup. I use that and then add 3 cups of water.
So 1 cup of dry nuts.
Correct. Do you do yours that way, or do you just measure?
I'm an eyeball kind of measurer.
All right.
This looks about right. Cover it with water. And I probably put too much nuts in, I'm sorry. So it'll still taste wonderful.
Anyone in the audience has a question, repeat your question and then answer it for the audience.
I'm turning this off so that we don't blow out the speakers here, and because it is good enough to strain. But if you were making the yogurt recipe, and if you see on there it says 10 minutes, and you do let it go for 10 minutes. It says use a stopwatch, and I did. And one of the reasons for that is if you're making yogurt with it, you want it to be a little warm, but it's very, very thoroughly mixed. I'm going to give this one more shot. Is that right?
And what Susan's going to do now is she's going to strain the nut meal out of it and put that aside. You can use that when you need nut flour or some sort of nut meal in a recipe. For today, we are going to be using this bag to strain it. And where did you get your bag?
Raw Foods. I think I got it from somebody at a raw food cooking class that I attended, but if you, again, go to the internet and Google raw foods, there's a number of websites that sell these bags because they're used in a lot of raw cooking.
And what would it be called? What is the name of that bag?
I think they just call it a raw food bag.
Or they might call it a nut milk
bag
or something like that. It's pretty common for people to have these. Now,
and if you could sew, you could just zip that up.
Is it nylon, like a knee-high nylon?
I would think probably. I actually do something completely different, and I have a vegetable juicer, and I actually pour the liquid through the juicer, and that separates the pulp from the liquid, and that's how I do mine. But it works all different ways, and she's going to see.
I want to make sure you can see this here in front of. I'm going to be milking the almond milk. When it goes through this bag, and it does strain, and then you can see it's white and creamy like milk, but I squeeze it to get it through just like you're milking a cow, sort of, I guess, as if I've milked a lot of cows in my life. But you just squeeze it as you go so you get all the milk out. Normally I would do more, but I'm going to do more. I just wanted to demonstrate with a small amount. So all the milk is out, and what you have left is really a powder that's great if you wanted to use that for cooking. You know, you have it all ready to go. So
you could use that in, say, the meatballs or something else that we're going to make a little bit later when we use almond flour. And while Susan is doing that, you can use any blender you want. I just thought I'd put a little word out there for the Vitamix. We were just talking about it earlier. If you don't have a Vitamix, you certainly don't need one, but we have one and we absolutely love it. It's a fancy $400 blender, which I thought was a ridiculous amount of money to spend for a blender until I got it. It does everything. There's a dry container that will blend all of your grains so you can grind your own grains, your own nut flours. Now again, you can do that with a regular blender too, just the horsepower is much higher, so it's much easier to blend things like ice and make smoothies. So something to consider if you're interested, but any blender will do the trick. Every client I've ever recommended the Vitamix to, though, has been more than thrilled with their purchase. So
and they sell it at Costco, for those of you who have a Costco near them, and they're a little less expensive.
All right, so what we're going to do then is, let me just describe a little bit of the process while she's doing that, of what the yogurt looks like. So for those who are dairy-free and want to have those good probiotics that you would normally get in yogurt, you can make your own by starting with something like nut milk. And that's what this recipe here describes. You're going to want let me actually back up a second. You're going to want to add a little sweetener. Typically, I like to add sweetener to my nut milk. You definitely want to add sweetener to your yogurt so the good bacteria has something to kind of feed on. And I know that Susan does her nut milks without sweetener often, but I find that if you're going to drink it as a milk or your kids are going to want to consume it rather than using it in a recipe, I really find that it really could use a little bit of sweetness. And I just use a little bit. You can put a couple dates in the blender and blend that up in there and use that for the sweetness. You can use a little bit of any. So if you want to make it SCD compliant, you'd want to use honey or dates or something like that. If you're not SCD compliant, you can use maple syrup or anything that would work for you. But I find a little bit, and how much you put, it's really up to taste, but you'd be amazed at how much sugar they often use in those container, the ones you buy at the store. So you can use a lot less when you make it yourself, which is another nice advantage. So I just use it till it's just lightly sweet, and you'll notice when you're making it.
Do you care if I make another batch?
No, go ahead. So she's going to make another batch while I just go ahead and describe the yogurt process itself. And this is the yogurt that we ended up making from the almond milk. And you can see it's fairly thick. It's not going to be as thick as what you get from regular yogurt at the store that you're used to. None of the homemade yogurts you make are that thick because they often use carrageenan or xanthan gum or some other thickener to thicken them up. And so just be aware of that. It's going to be a lot more runny than you would get something that you could spoon.
But it tastes like yogurt, only spectacular.
Yes. So we'll let you
Make
blend.
noise again, sorry.
Okay. So while she's finishing up making the milk itself, I'll explain a little part of the yogurt process. You basically start with the nut milk and a little bit of sweetener to it, and then you're going to add some sort of a probiotic starter.
It's right down here.
Thank you. And this is one called ProGurt that has no casein or dairy in it, and there's several of them out there, but you really want to find one, of course, if you're casein-free, that is a casein-free version. And so this is one that's often used and very good. And you add the appropriate amount into your milk, and then all you do is basically warm it. You keep it warm for typically 24 hours. SCD is a 24-hour fermentation, and the reason that you can't buy your yogurt at the store and be SCD compliant is that there is they often add milk solids to the milk itself, which means all the lactose isn't processed out, which means there's some sugar left in it. But when you make it yourself, all of those milk sugars are fermented, and then you end up with something that you can consume as long as you can do casein. But in this case, whatever kind of milk you use, in this case we're using nut milk, that's all you want to do is you want to keep it warm for that period of time. And you can do that a variety of ways. This is a yogurt maker, and I don't actually use one of these, so I'm going to describe how I make it, and then I will let Susan explain how she uses her yogurt maker. I actually have a food dehydrator, and all it is basically a warming oven, and it keeps everything at whatever consistent temperature you want. And so I just take my milk, put it in some sort of a mason jar, put some sort of a lid or fabric or something on top of it, put it in my dehydrator, and it just stays warm at whatever temperature I do, and I'll describe that in a minute, for 24 hours. And then it's done, and then you refrigerate it, and you're off and running. The temperature you do depends. It depends on whether you use regular pasteurized milk or if you use raw milk, on what temperature you're going to do it at. But in general, it's somewhere between 95 and 115 degrees typically. And the way a yogurt maker works is it's basically just its own little mini warming oven, and it just keeps these little jars warm and fermenting in their own, which is nice because then you can send your kids to school or whatever with their own little jar of yogurt if you want, which makes it nice and easy. Did you want to say anything else about your?
I did. I wanted to say that The little jars, I'm not particularly thrilled with the little jars. I think I would rather, I know that they have quart yogurt makers, and I'd like to buy one of those for my next time. I've been, again, at Julie's direction, long distance, been learning to make this, and I made this almond milk yogurt. You have to strain it. You don't have to. It will separate when you cook, so that you'll have the curds and whey, you know. It'll have the liquid that's the whey and then the yogurt that's thicker. You can either do one of two things. You can strain that out and get a little thicker, or you can just mix it up. So whatever you want to do. I mean, you can use both parts. Both parts have good probiotics and good things, and it tastes great. When you're trying to replicate dairy, which I know so many of us, myself included, are always looking for that sour cream, ricotta cheese kind of thing to cook with, this works. It has that sour creamy taste. It tastes delicious. And so it's a really nice thing and very simple to do. And I just want to throw in one thing, because I know there's been a couple of questions about my children are allergic to nuts. And I don't know that it is compliant with the SCD, but you can make your own rice milk and make rice milk yogurt. It doesn't have to be a nut milk to make yogurt. And yes.
Sorry, I have that machine and I tried it with rice milk
And it didn't work with rice milk? It was too watery. It may be watery, but did you get the fermented taste and flavor?
a little bit.
And I'm sorry, I want to repeat that question. For the benefit of those listening, someone said that they have their own yogurt maker, the same as mine, and they made it with rice milk, and it came out very watery, but it did still taste like yogurt. And that's sort of the problem we were talking about, that it may not get as thick. If you strain it through cheesecloth, which we did, it definitely, we got some thicker liquid.
So this is what ours is. You can kind of see it's a little lumpy, which we could work out if we wanted to. But we did strain out the liquid part, and there was a good bowl of liquid. So if we had kept it in, it would have been a lot more runny.
So it isn't necessarily. And I believe that you can also do this with coconut milk. Mm-hmm. So in coconut milk already being a little thicker, because the rice milk and the almond milk, they're watery. They're more of a consistency of water than whole milk or soy milk that we don't like. So you might try it with coconut milk as another option. Or if you are buying rice milk, which is very watery, it's a little different than if you were making your own rice milk. And if you see me later, I have some recipes for making your own rice milk. So go ahead,
Okay,
sorry.
Great, no, that's great.
Put this away.
Okay. I was gonna add something to what you said there, and I'm trying to recall what it was. You just want a little, basically, to ferment things, you basically need something for the bacteria to feed on. So whatever milk you use, you want to have a little sweetness to it. Add your starter to it, and then just warm it up, and then the bacteria will do the rest and ferment it. And all fermented foods are sour, and so you'll get that sort of sourness to it if you get it to come out right. And then I'm trying to think if there's anything else on the yogurt recipe to mention here. I think that's all. We are going to now adapt that or use that into our smoothie recipe. And there's tons of smoothie recipes. You have one in your cookbook as well. And this one is kind of adapted from the Nourishing Tradition Sally Fallon recipe, but I changed it slightly to make it compliant. I remember what I was going to say. Rice milk would not be compliant on SCD since grains are not compliant. So if you're going to make it SCD compliant, you would want to use nut milk or coconut milk. And we will talk a little bit later on if you're allergic to nuts or sensitive to nuts. We can address that further. It is one thing that does create. Sometimes if you're truly allergic to nuts, you can't really get around it, and you would not want to do this particular recipe. But we can talk about it maybe a little bit more and try to find some options or alternatives. So seeds are another good way. So you could use hemp seeds or pumpkin seeds or any of those seeds, sunflower seeds. And again, it just depends on what nuts or seeds your child is sensitive to. So sometimes they're just allergic to peanuts, and sometimes you can do other ones. Sometimes they're just sensitive to almonds because of the phenols or something. So you can see, and sometimes you can use a variety of different seeds and nuts. And sometimes seeds are more easily tolerated for some. Okay, so we are going to, in this case, use some of the almond yogurt and some of the almond milk, and then we are going to add the rest of the fruit and everything.
Do you want to add this at the end to thin it?
Sure.
Just a spoon.
Okay.
Some coconut oil.
Yes. So I usually pre-melt my coconut oil, but I hear people all the time don't do that.
I don't.
So usually if your blender's good, it'll just do it. It'll blend it up nicely anyway.
And did you say yes or
And,
no?
and we'll do a little tiny bit of honey just because we have berries, and berries tend to be a little bit more sour. Often you don't need to use any honey if you don't want to.
It's probably a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay. We'll do that. Okay. All right. Then we just add, we got to add some bananas. In this case, we peeled and froze some bananas, so they're ready. And just the nice thing about when you freeze them ahead of time is you just get that more frozen texture, which is kind of nice in a smoothie. It makes it a little more icy. And then what you're going to want is a little bit of liquid to make sure it spins in the blender. And so that's what we're going to be using the nut milk for. So let's see how that works. This is really simple, and you can start to add all sorts of pureed vegetables in here. If your child, for instance, won't eat any vegetables, you could cook and puree some squash, add it to this, and they wouldn't know the difference. And so that's a nice way to get some additional nutrients in.
Scrape down the side, it's stuck.
Okay. And if your kids aren't as picky, you can add green powders, you can add all sorts of things to it. Oh, that's right.
Do you want to taste it?
Sure, let's try.
Every good cook has to sample their...
It's good. It's great. Oh, you can definitely taste the coconut. And this is a nice way to get your coconut raw. When you heat oils, you destroy some of the good fats. So by using it in something like a smoothie, it's really nice because you'll get those good oils intact in their most nutritious form. Yeah, that'd be great. So we're going to...
Keep making more and so that everyone can sample this.
That's right. All right.
So, Julie, what are some of your favorite protein powders?
I often don't use protein powders for a variety of reasons. One is you don't want to hydrolyze any of your proteins, which when we talked about MSG, the hydrolyzed corn protein and all of that. So often when you get a hydrolyzed a protein powder, they're hydrolyzed, and you don't want that. And so sometimes I just don't use them at all. But if you have a child that really won't eat protein, then it would be good to use a protein powder. There's one that I know with whey that I really like by Designs for Health that does not hydrolyze their protein. But of course that's whey, and that wouldn't be allowed on the casein on either of these particular diets. But there's often pea protein that you can use, which you can use hemp. I've used hemp before. So there are some proteins that you can use, but just look for a low heat process of getting the protein so that you can just avoid that problem.
Wait, one more time, I didn't have this.
Sometimes if I want a little more protein, I might just add some more nuts. You can actually add
what I
nuts
do.
or seeds when you're blending it up, and that's another way. Okay. Did we put the honey in? Did you put the honey? there are all sorts of wonderful, great antioxidant fruits that you can use, and they're alkalizing and anti-inflammatory. And so there are tons of mangosteen and a variety of different things. So you can use the basics like blueberries and raspberries, or you can get a little bit more fancy and get some of the other ones that there are available in the stores too, or in juices.
Papaya and pineapple are both great for digestive enzymes. If you're going to use pineapple, though, make sure you use the core of the pineapple also. That's where the majority of the enzymes are in.
Okay.
Great.
Mix more.
Would you do that with a juicer, or will a blender chop up the core?
That's a good question.
The Vitamix will chop up the core.
The Vitamix would. Yeah, it depends how good it you have.
We're going to need more berries. Can I double up the amount of other things for that?
Because we had plenty. It was very,
Yeah.
very fruity. Do we put the bananas in? No. I'll add some more.
Sorry, this one's losing it.
So double the amount of bananas.
Okay. And this becomes a great way, like I said, to start sneaking in nutrients, but don't start that way because you don't want to lose your child's trust and have them think you're sneaking things in everywhere. Only sneak if you can do it and they're not going to know it or be upset about it. If they are, then just wait and get them used to some of these things before you start making it more fancy.
The coconut oil and the extra virgin version of it is an antibacterial, an antifungal. It regulates thyroid. It has excellent fatty acids. And using it in this, you get so much wonderful fat for your brain.
Yeah, it's a great fat for being able to utilize, and for people that are, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow, but people that want to lose weight or people that just need energy, it's a medium chain triglyceride, so it's one of the very few in our diet that actually helps us. We burn it pretty much immediately. We don't store it, so it's a great source of usable fuel.
Coconut. Question about what's the because of coconut.
Okay. No, are we pretty much done? Can you just take the
We
whole
have
thing?
one. We have one more.
Okay.
One
Sorry.
more batch?
You keep talking.
All right. So one of the questions was, what if your child's allergic to coconut? In that case, you're not going to want to use coconut oil. It's like any of these foods. They can be nutritious for us, but if your body can't process it, then it's not good for your particular system. So if that's the case, I just wouldn't use the coconut oil. It's certainly not necessary for the recipe. It just adds some good nutrients for those that can. And
They add flax oil?
you can add flax oil. If you're already getting your fish oils, though, and also flax oil has a bit of a stronger flavor, not quite as easy to add. And there's just some new research. I'm not as thrilled about flax as I am with fish oils. So, you may not even need the extra oil, or maybe just dump some extra nuts in or something like that if you want a little bit more.
Anything else that is a good brain fat as coconut?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's one particularly comparable. The nice thing about the coconut is the antifungal properties is really wonderful, and I don't know of a good oil that would mimic that. I wonder if, I don't know if palm oil, being also a tropical oil, may have some similar properties, but I don't know that off the top of my head. I would probably just use a lot of the other good fats, like maybe use walnut for your nut milk so that you can get some of the good omega-3s and things that way. That's probably the way that I would do that.
I'm just going to make one more batch. You keep talking. We're waiting for some more fruit to come.
Oh, right. And let's see, what else can we say about our smoothie recipe? Sometimes If you use berries, those little seeds are sometimes problematic for kids, just if they're really picky or they don't like texture things. So you have to kind of see if you want to strain it. You could certainly probably use this bag or something similar to strain the smoothie if you wanted to get the seeds out. So if your child's not liking it, you might just want to really explore what it is about it that they're not happy about. But bananas are usually great if they can tolerate bananas because they're smooth and they give that sort of thickness to the smoothie. But from there, you can really do or add anything that you'd like to it. I'm going to see if there's anything else here I can say. Does anybody have any questions about? Yeah. Okay. Most honey that's going to be a raw honey is going to be SED legal. Yes. Grapes. In a smoothie or just for health reasons? Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. So if your child likes only grapes, I would suspect a potential phenol sensitivity because grapes are very high in phenols and salicylates. So I would just say you might want to explore that and see if that's the challenge. Normally, they have some good nutritional properties, although they're pretty sweet, so sometimes other fruits might be better. There's nothing, I mean, just for healthy people, they're fine. You can have some now and then, but I wouldn't rely only on grapes because I might be concerned about that potential. So for that purpose.
I don't know if you have it in your book. On our website at Pathways Med, if you go under diet, we have a list of very high, medium, low, and very low on salicylates of foods. They're all gluten and casein free, and what's high and what's low. So you can know the typical way to know if your child has a salicylate or phenol problems. Some of the things I know of, I'm sure Julie can add to this list, but typically the ears get hot, they'll get circles under their eyes, very hyperactive after some of these, can be hyperactive after eating it. Honey is also an extremely high salicylate. So when I work with a lot of kids that have low salicylate problems, honey is like the last sweetener that I would put them on. But the berries can tend to be high on that as well too. Cinnamon, some of the spices. Almonds, though, are also very, very high. So if you want to know, if you think, the reason for it has a lot to do with the detoxification system and how they're able to process food and get it out very quickly. So if things are kind of shut down, that's why that's continuously a problem.
Yeah, and I would just have to say, I would definitely agree, and probably a big majority of my book, there's a huge section on just the biochemistry of sulfation and methylation and why that might be a problem and how to work on it and how to try to get it going again so that you can process some of those phenols and things. So again, like I said earlier, you can have any food that could be bad for a particular individual.
Right.
So whether it's honey or almonds or berries. So they're not bad foods, they just that maybe your child might not be able to tolerate them.
That's exactly right, yes.
I'm going to make noise again, just quickly.
A little more liquid.
Those berries are more frozen.
Frozen, right.
Loud.
Just don't want it dripping all over.
Okay.
Like these berries were not sitting out for a while, so they're a little more frozen.
berries.
Just a minute.
You could probably
I'm
just
just
the whole
going
thing off and pour it out.
Excuse me.
I'm going to move over. Okay, let Julie continue.
Okay.
I'll stay here if you want.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start just moving towards our next activity here, which is the meatballs.
Let me clear off.
You go help her.
Sorry, I will clear you.
All right, very good. So the great thing about this meatball recipe is that it's GFCF, it's SCD compliant, and it's another great way to, again, sneak some of those vegetables into kids that don't like them. And this is actually a place that usually a good place to start is like butternut squash or some sort of squash. They typically are sweet and kind of have some creamy texture to them, and they're pretty easy to sneak into anything. And so we're going to add them into meatballs right now. Yes, yes.
That's if you use the GI, the ProGert brand. You want to keep them frozen. And if you order them on the internet, which is what I did, they ship them to you in a package that's all frozen up. And
I believe
for making yogurt, yes.
and Claire Labs also uses non-casein probiotics, and they have a yogurt starter too. So there's a couple good ones out there. And you just go based on the recipe on how much liquid you need and how much probiotic starter, depending. Okay. So this is where we're going to use our great grass-fed meat. And as Betsy was mentioning earlier, it's really important to find a grass-fed source. So it's going to be much higher in nutrients and all sorts of wonderful things. And it's going to, what you want is 100% grass-fed, like Betsy mentioned. You don't want them to grain finish it, because grain finish and grass-fed have a different flavor. And so people are used to that grain flavor, and so a lot of companies will grain finish them in the last week, but it really changes all of those good properties. And so you want to do that. And what we have here is some beef, as well as we put a little lamb in as well, but you can use any kind of ground meat that your child likes.
What do you need?
So if you want to find that, you can. What I often do is recommend people go to the Weston A. Price website. They have a list of local chapters, and all of those people will, any of those people will be able to give you some local sources in your area. Otherwise, I might do a Google search. You'd be amazed at finding little pockets of small farmers in different places, or a co-op in your area that can share and go in and get a cow together, and it's much less expensive.
If I could add Wisconsin, because Julie wouldn't know this as much because she's from San Francisco, but at Wisconsin, I believe I've read, is #2 in the country for organic beef. Now, that doesn't mean grass-fed. Organic doesn't mean grass-fed. But because there are more organic farmers in Wisconsin, you should be able to find. I know of quite a few. You can call me or send me an email, and I can refer you to some that.
So we're going to take the meat, and then we're going to add in some eggs. And then we go ahead and put in the squash. Then what I did was yesterday we baked the squash. We took it, sliced it in half, put it on a baking tin with a little bit of water so that it doesn't burn, and bake it at 350 for 30, 40 minutes, whenever it's done. Once you can poke a fork in there and it's fairly soft, you just scrape it out and then put it in a food processor with a little bit of the liquid from baking it, and then you end up with this really nice smooth texture for your squash. You'll add that.
They're done. Everybody's had it. They've had enough. They've already done. These are extras.
And then you're just going to start, of course, just simple. You're going to mix it all up. And you're going to also add 2 more things. One is some almond flour. And one of the questions earlier that we were going to get to is, how do you make almond flour? So this is a good place to describe that. This is almond flour. I'm also going to use cashew flour in a little bit. And you can see how it all nut flour is ground up nuts. So the one secret is that you want to get it fine enough that it's not big chunks. So if you have a lot of patience in a coffee grinder, it's actually the best because it can grind it really fine. Of course, you have to do many batches with the coffee grinder, so you can also use a blender. But what I'll do after that is to take do we have the, yeah, thank you. Take some sort of a strainer, and you just put your nuts in, and then just sift it into a bigger bowl. And it will get you a nice fine powder like this. And then you can do whatever you want with your extra nuts. You can throw them into a smoothie or do anything you'd like. So that's the whole secret to the nuts. Nothing particularly difficult about it. Probably the most difficult part is just straining out the big pieces, which I suppose you don't have to do if you don't have picky kids, but I know that it does make a difference just for texture purposes. You don't really notice the nut flour in the meatballs when you strain it properly. So we're just going to mix this all together.
And we'll be sampling them shortly.
Yes. Oh,
Between
great question.
Big difference between, organic doesn't have anything to, organic is good, but it could be organic corn that they're eating or organic soy or whatever. So grass-fed, cows are, Betsy, you raised these. You should answer this question. The question was, what's the difference between organic and grass-fed?
Organic can just mean that their feed is organic feed, but they could be eating 100% grain on an organic diet. So you want organic grass-fed, because you can get grass-fed that's not organic, and which if it's grass-fed and it's not organic, then that also can mean that the fields are sprayed that they're eating on. So you want to be careful with that also. So you want grass-fed and organic. I have a supplier that I know of that does grass-fed, but it's not organic. So it's which one would you rather have? Personally, I know that this may not agree with everybody. I would rather have grass-fed because for mineral content, it is more important to have grass-fed. And then if you can get the extra of having organic, because most grass-fed farmers are not going to be abundantly spraying over and over again. They're somewhat conscious about what's happening, but it's expensive and it takes a lot of work to become organic certified. So that's for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And cows are not supposed to eat grain. So just like us, if we eat an unhealthy diet, we're going to be unhealthy. They eat grain all day long. They are not supposed to eat grain at all, and they are very unhealthy.
Yeah.
And then we eat that unhealthy meat, and then it's not
like
good for us.
it's like cows on Gorilla Munch cereal.
And that's one of the most inflammatory, or most, usually meat is low allergenic. However, of the meats, beef is the most allergenic, and I really contribute that to the fact that they're fed a diet that is not their native diet, and so it's inflammatory, and they have all sorts of inflammatory compounds created.
Pork wouldn't be more than beef?
It's, for whatever reason, the top food sensitivity.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, from more of an IgG kind of perspective. Now, there's other people, blood types don't do well with pork, so that's another challenge. But
parasites and all that.
Yeah. So anyway, you just form them into little meatballs. It's simple, and then you're going to put it on some sort of a parchment paper on a baking rack and put it in your oven. I've made these both on the stove and on the oven, and definitely the oven is much more simple, and I think they come out even better. They stay in ball shape a lot better when you do that. So that's all you do, and then you can bake up as many as you'd like. You can bake extra and put them in the freezer, or make some other meals with them and freeze those, or whatever works best for you. You can even just make them up. Sometimes I just make them up into these little balls and then freeze them raw. Pull out a few when I need them for the day, and then you can have that meal already ready to go, and all you have to do is just cook them up. Anything to add?
I just wanted to tell them that this is a combination of beef and lamb.
Oh, I think I mentioned that. So Susan was just mentioning, so we use here a combination of beef and lamb, but you can use anything, chicken, turkey, lamb, whatever you'd like.
I just wanted to make sure in case somebody had an allergy or something to lamb.
Thank you.
And the lambs are from the same person who got the eggs. And the lamb is from hair lamb versus woolly lamb. And their difference is that the woolly lambs have lanolin in them, so they lick themselves and then they get the lanolin that they ingest, and then they have sort of a real gamey taste. And the hair lambs don't have any lanolin in their hair versus fur, and so the lamb is very, very mild and absolutely spectacular.
Great to know.
I buy it.
All right, and that's all you do, and then you just bake them that way. You're going to want to watch them, though, because they very easily, I've tried this several different times with different types of ovens, and you want to just keep an eye on them. And I usually cook them a little bit lower temperature. I would say that for a normal oven, not a convection oven, you want probably 325, and you want to just keep an eye on them so they don't end up drying out. Ah.
Good question.
Do you have
Just a substitute for eggs?
Yeah.
Well, the substitute that I like to use for eggs, if you have a problem, is a combination of flaxseed and hot water. And I put the whole flax seeds, I think Betsy does it a little different, but I take the whole flax seeds, a couple tablespoons, and I put it at the bottom of the blender, and I top it with very hot water, and then just puree it. And it actually gets slimy just like an egg does. And it's a great thing to use as an egg substitute for a binder. Eggs are used for different reasons. Sometimes they're used as a binder, sometimes they're a leavener to make something rise, sometimes they're added for moisture. Depending on how or why you're replacing that egg, you want to use different things. Like you can use a fruit puree to add if you just want moisture. And if you're trying to get something to raise more, like using a leavening, I use a combination of things. Sometimes I use a little bit of the flax, sometimes I add bubbly water, and I double the baking powder. Is that what?
Yeah, double baking powder. You can use
use the
club
bubbly
soda.
water.
Club soda is different than seltzer water. Club soda has a lot more fizz to it. So by using the club soda, you'll help things to rise better, especially if you're making egg-free pancakes and you really need it to leaven more. Use the club soda for the liquid, and then what she was saying with the flax works absolutely great. You get a great consistency pancake.
One of the breads that I make, a gluten, not SCD compliant, but a gluten and dairy-free bread, you can easily make egg-free just using the club soda for the bubbles and using some flax egg replacer.
Okay.
The egg replacer on the market, the one from Energy, I don't use it. I'm sorry. I don't know why. I can't give you a good, other than I just haven't had good results from it. It's potato starch. And
tapioca starch. I mean, you could make something yourself with just a little teeny bit of potato starch and tapioca. I mean, really, the only purpose of it that stuff is just for binding. And you can bind, and we didn't mention this because this wouldn't be SCD compliant, but you could use, if you weren't on SCD, you could use a little tapioca, which would help as a binder. But the baking powder and the club soda will help to leaven it as well.
All right. You can buy almond flour already made if you prefer. It's just a little pricey, and so it's easy to make yourself as well, but you can definitely buy it. And then if you wanted to use other nuts that aren't as readily available in flours, then being able to make it yourself is nice. Or if you're on a rotation diet, you need to use different nuts on different days, making it yourself is convenient. Yes.
That's empty. Yeah, because we're going to put this into the empty.
Yes, you
Repeat
can.
the question. Repeat the
Here
question.
it is. It's already here.
Can the nut flour be rancid as well? Yes. So nuts go rancid very easily, so thank you for that. So another nice reason to make it yourself, because it'll be very fresh that way, and so I definitely recommend doing that. And I suppose you could get fancy and I was going to say you could get fancy and soak and then dehydrate your nuts, but you're going to get a different texture, so probably not make as good of a flour as if you just use the raw nuts. So I just use raw nuts for that. And there was one other thing I was going to say about the raw nuts. When you're blending it in your whatever you're using, your food processor, don't blend it too long or you'll turn it into nut butter. So you want to blend it up till it's finely blended. But if it still seems chunky, that's when you want to sift it. If you keep blending it more, it'll just release more of the oils and it'll get stickier. Okay, so we're going to go on to sauerkraut. So if you wanted something to eat your meatballs with, you could have a little bit of meat and sauerkraut or anything you want. I often use sauerkraut to add to a salad, so it's one of the ingredients in my tossed salad. I love the flavor combination of grapefruit, if you don't have a citrus allergy, grapefruit and sauerkraut, whatever it is about the flavor combination, I find that it blends really well. So I was at a Super Bowl party for some friends that they're kind of into this, but many of them hadn't done any of this type of stuff, and everyone loved the salad, even people that had never done any fermented foods before. And so it's something that everybody can like. I just use greens, some whatever chopped vegetables you want in there, along with a little bit of grapefruit slices, and then I just put like a big dollop on top and spread it around, and it makes a really easy to use for a salad. Sometimes I even use it just as a salad all by itself. So let me explain it to you a little bit more. And then we can go from there. So sauerkraut is used in almost every culture. They have their own version of sauerkraut. You can go to Korea and get kimchi. You can go to Japan. Pretty much most cultures have some sort of fermented vegetable or cultured vegetable. That's what sauerkraut is. It's just cultured cabbage. And so you can add all sorts of vegetables. In this case, we are going to be sampling the sauerkraut in a minute, and we have a little bit of carrot as well as we're using a few seeds in there you can cut down the salt by adding some seeds, although I don't particularly have a problem with the salt, but I like the flavor of the seeds, so I add them, but you can do it either way. In this case, let me just kind of describe the process. So you want to shred up your cabbage, and you want to shred it up into kind of pieces, whatever you like. You can do thinly sliced small slivers. You can do chunky pieces. I first started out, I liked mine kind of thinly sliced, but now I kind of will eat it in any way, shape, or form. So you can use a food processor, but I don't, because I've just found that the mandolin is just so easy. You are going to take your head of cabbage, cut it in half, and then just start grating it on here. And I kept those aside so I can show you. I'm not going to actually, blend these for you because it's pretty simple to do. Yeah, if you could put those in there, that'd be great. And so once you get your cabbage shredded, one thing to be careful is just be careful of your fingers because it's very sharp, and so that's the only trick to the mandolin. But other than that, you can get inexpensive ones, expensive ones, and just do that part. And then you can add, like I said, shredded carrots. You can add beets, anything you'd like. The thing about cabbage is it's high in lactobacillus bacteria. It just naturally occurs on the plant, so you don't actually have to use any bacterial starter. Now, there's some recipes that do use whey, but whey is dairy-based, and since we're not doing dairy, you don't need to do that. As long as you use some cabbage, then you're in pretty good shape. You can also carrots, beets, those, if you think about the things that grow radishes, things that go in the ground or on the ground tend to have more lactobacillus bacteria. And so as long as a majority of your vegetable are those, then you can add other things too. So I've seen sauerkraut made with green beans and all sorts of things. You wouldn't want to make a green bean only because you probably end up with slime. You probably wouldn't want to make a carrot only, although you could. I usually start with the cabbage and then add other things to it. But as you get better at it, you could probably try to make a carrot only. I don't think I'd ever make a green bean only because carrots also have some good lactobacillus. So you start with that, and then what you do is you want to, the whole thing about sauerkraut is you're going to ferment this cabbage on your counter for anywhere from 2 weeks to 8 months. Usually 2 weeks to 3 months. It depends how you like it. Now this is a 2-week ferment that Susan had made up, which I think is great. And I also love mine really pungent. I like it really sour and got some kick to it. So I usually ferment mine about 2 months. That's just my preference. The recipe we're going to be using is from a man named Sandor Katz. Actually, this is just sort of a few of the instructions from that. But if you want the more thorough recipe, if you go to Wild Fermentation, his book, and his name is Sandor Katz, K-A-T-Z. He has a really amazing, all of his fermentation recipes are really wonderful. And so what you want to really do, so what he had mentioned is that as it ferments longer, you get different varieties of bacteria in different concentrations. So it does get more fermented and more bacteria as you go, but there's different types of bacteria that as you go through the process. So what he likes to do is make a batch and eat it as he goes. And I'll describe that after we're done. I just make the whole batch, put the whole batch in my fridge when I'm done, and just eat it that way. But either way, and any amount of fermenting it is really fine. It depends kind of what your taste desires and how much time you have. So what you're going to want to do is take some salt, like we have here, and like I said, you can just use salt, or you can use salt and some seeds. I like mine, I just like the flavor of the seeds personally, and I've had sauerkraut where it's really salty. That's usually because they use a little too much salt and they don't ferment it long enough. As you ferment it longer, it gets more mellow. The salt gets more mellow over time. So you're going to basically just shred up all your cabbage, and then you're going to toss some salt in there and salt your cabbage. And then as as we're working on this today, or as we're doing some other things, I'll show you what starts to happen. But what happens is it starts sweating, and all the juices from the cabbage get released into the container that you're making. And so the way that you create a fermentation and not mold is by inhibiting the mold growth. And that happens from two ways. One is salt, which inhibits the mold growth, but also submerging it underwater. Once it's underwater, mold will not grow. So that is the secret key to the whole thing, is to make sure that you have it so that there's no cabbage exposed above the water line. So it's important to make sure that as it starts sweating, just add a little more there. As it starts sweating, that you have enough liquid. If you don't have enough liquid, you're going to want to add more of your own. And this is not in the recipe, so you might want to write down it's 1 tablespoon of salt for every cup of water. That's the proportion of salt water that you'd want to add to cover your sauerkraut or your cabbage if there's not enough liquid produced from the cabbage. Sometimes the cabbage is fresh and it has a lot of liquid, and there's plenty of juice. Other times, if the cabbage is older, or depending on the varieties, you might not get enough liquid, and you really need that liquid. So if you need to, you can add a little bit of salt water to the top of it.
Would the seeds be in there too? Were you using seeds?
Yes, yes.
And which seeds did you put in the sample that we
I use celery seed and juniper berries, actually.
So I usually do mine, the 3 seeds you see on this recipe, but any of them are good, and they all have different flavor. And juniper berry is actually a very common ingredient for sauerkraut. It's really a great way to go.
I like the flavor of juniper.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So so we'll just imagine this sweating, and you'll yeah. So what you're going to want to do is actually, you know what? I'm going to do something else here. We're just going to imagine that there is liquid that's now rising. You can sort of see in this one all the liquid. It's just really tons of liquid in there. That's what it's going to look like when, actually, you know what? We'll just use this. I'll just do it with this one. And then, so we'll just, this is actually a sauerkraut that's already started fermenting, but we'll just use it as our example. So we'll just imagine that this is fresh cabbage that just has the new liquid on top. And what you want to do is, the whole key is make sure that everything's underwater. So what you can do to kind of help, you can take some of your outside leaves off of your cabbage before you start grating it, so that you can use them kind of as a way of keeping all of those little sauerkraut shreddings down, because you'll see that as we push the plate, anything that doesn't fit. So one of the keys is this is the longest part of the whole process, finding a jar and a lid that fit tightly enough. Because if there's a big gap, and you'll see in a minute there's a fairly big gap here, then all of those little shreddings are going to float to the top of the water line, and all those things floating on top will start molding. That's the secret. So I would use the cabbage leaves here, or get a bigger plate or something so you can keep more submerged under the water. You can also buy a crock. They have, they're called harsh crocks, and they're from Germany, and I don't exactly know the spelling of that, but they're about $100 or maybe a little more. And so for that reason, I just
$12.99
yeah.
Target.
I always make mine in some sort of, I use a ceramic crock, and I always make mine in my ceramic crock. If you want something foolproof, if you live in a really hot climate, it doesn't really cook, but it gets kind of soft because it's so hot and it goes fairly quickly. I live in San Francisco, it's freezing year-round, so I make great sauerkraut because it never gets above 65 in my kitchen ever. And so if you have a really hot place, you might want the extra special kraut container because it's insulated. But for our purposes, you just want 2 jars. So it can literally be, you can make small batches. You can make a batch like this. If you pretend that this is cabbage, you could take another, let's say this were a jar, put a lid on it, have some water in there so it weighs it down, and if you can see, anything that is going to be just about the right size is going to keep that cabbage down, that'll work. So you can use any 2 containers that kind of have that size ratio. And then You're going to push it down, and you can see the water starts to rise above. Can everybody kind of see that? And then what you're going to do, we would ultimately want a little more water in here to make sure that those little cabbage leaves were underneath. But you can see how the cabbage leaves start to block that the shreds from coming up. So then what we do is we take some weight. You can use, I've heard people use rocks that they've scrubbed and cleaned, or bricks or something, but I usually use a mason jar with water in it. You want to just clean it, put it in there, and that is going to hold down everything that's in there. Then what you want to do is you're going to clean off inside here all these little tiny shreddings. Every single one of these little shreddings you're going to clean off the side, and then you're going to take something and you're going to go inside and you're going to, any of those little shreds that float to the top, you're going to scrape them off. If you don't do that, as I mentioned 5 times, you will get mold. Those little pieces will mold, and they will just usually make a little patch of mold or spread mold or something like that in there.
But that doesn't ruin it.
I was just going to say, I've made many a moldy batch. In fact, people love my sauerkraut, and I want to tell them sometimes, you have no idea the mold that was growing on that before you ate that. But I've never gotten sick, nor has anybody I've ever known, because you do not eat the mold, you scrape off the mold, and then what's underneath the water line is free of mold. There's no mold down there. So, you know, I'm exaggerating a little bit. There's a little mold sometimes, and you'll smell it. It will smell like rotting cabbage. It smells terrible. What we do, take the whole thing apart, take off the entire top layer of whatever it seems, you know, usually I take an inch off, take that top layer off, and then you smell again, and you'll smell, it smells fresh, and it smells like cabbage or sauerkraut. This is where it's good to have a cooking buddy or a husband or someone that you can say, okay, let's try this, and then we usually both take a spoonful at the same time, and then when we both don't die, then we know we're in good shape. And I have to say, I've never, ever gotten sick from any fermented foods, and I've spoken with Sandor before, and he says that he's never found anybody that's had a batch gone wrong where somebody's gotten sick from it. You'll know if it's slimy, if it's smelly, if it's rotten smelling, do not consume it. Usually it'll smell like this kind of a fresh, sort of sour kind of a smell.
I think it smells sweet.
Yeah.
I just have to give you a little of my experience. I was so afraid of making sauerkraut. You have no idea. I'd never done this before, and Julie wanted to demonstrate this, so that meant I had to make it. And again, probably the hardest part was finding a crock, and because I couldn't find something that had a straight side so that I could have a plate that fit in there. The first batch that I made, I totally filled with cabbage, totally filled. And I think I bought 12 pounds of cabbage. I had tons of cabbage, many ones. And I filled the first one with carrots and cabbage, and then I started on the second one. And in the time it took me just to pack the second one, this first thing that had been up to the top was like 2/3 down already. I mean, I couldn't believe the amount of water that came out of it. Then the second batch, I didn't have as much cabbage left, so it was a smaller one. But I mean, we took some of this out already, but this little amount here was my second batch, and I made it, you know, from the same bunch of cabbages, but obviously they were drier. There wasn't as much liquid in there, so it didn't have as much water in it. The first batch, I didn't have to add any of that salt water that she talked about. I know I called Julie a million times. It's like, it's doing this, it's doing that. Is this right? I'm married to a lawyer. He was sure I was going to come and poison everybody. What are you doing? I felt kind of like Harry Potter with my cauldrons of bubbling stuff between this yogurt and all that. I am so thrilled with the results and so grateful for Julie's instruction. If I can do this, you all can do this. And you tasted it. What did you think? I was very excited.
Great. Thank you.
All.
2
Pardon
weeks.
me?
2 weeks.
You ate mine, and it was 2 weeks. Yes.
So what I often do is I will just get a ceramic crock that doesn't have. I love these lips. These are also great for what is it? Kombucha. But my crock actually for my sauerkraut has a straight. I usually use a 1 gallon container with straight sides, which makes it easier to find a lid to go, kind of a cover to go on top. And I can put about probably 10 to 12 pounds of cabbage, probably 6 to 8 heads of cabbage in this one little thing. And what I forgot to mention in the process is once this starts sweating and you may not be able to see it, and you could come up later and look, but you can, up here you can tell it's already getting glistening and wet, and if we let it sit for another hour or two, you'd have some water at the bottom. So usually, I kind of let it sit and do a little of its work on its own, and then I also start, one of the key pieces of the process that I forgot is that you want to kind of start that process of breaking down some of the cellular structure. So you can use a potato masher and you can pound it. This is the part that kids love to participate in, by the way. You can get one of those French rolling pins, those kind of wooden rolling pins, and just pound at it, a potato masher, or you can just use your hand and you can just squeeze it like that. And you just want to break up some of those cell walls. You don't need to do it too much, but kind of do this. You can use your fist, you can pound it with something, and you don't want it so broken down that it starts getting mushy, but you kind of want to smash it up a little bit, and you'd be amazed at how many pounds of cabbage you can pack into a small little thing. So usually if you're going to go through the effort, I usually like to do at least 5 pounds of cabbage myself. I often now do more like 8 to 10 pounds of cabbage. And what else about the process? Oh, just things to be aware of. Just look out for things that might seem strange. So, a little bit of just kitchen mold, like the green mold or the little white milky mold is usually fine. But if it's anything funny, like rainbow-colored mold or blue streaks or anything kind of weird, just throw the batch out. It's not worth it. But just a little, if it just seems normal, a little bit of mold is fine. And Sandor actually says that the only difference between fermented and rotten is perspective. So keep that in mind.
And do you store this, so this is out on your countertop?
Yes.
And then after it's finished?
Then you're going to put it in the fridge. So you're going to leave it like this. You're going to cover it with a fabric cloth, a muslin cloth or a kitchen towel or something, and you're going to somehow use a rubber band or something to kind of seal it in. You do not want flies landing in any of your ferments because they will lay eggs and you will get worms in whatever you're making. So, just an important little, again, I've never had worms in any of my stuff, but just make sure you have a cover on it so you don't take any chances or get any other, things in there that you wouldn't want in there. And you're going to leave it on your counter. You don't want it in direct sunlight. Usually for my sauerkraut, I usually put it on my refrigerator or somewhere out of the way. Sometimes I'll put it underneath my cupboard or something. And I just leave it there. Now, like what I said, Sandor does is that when, let's say 2 weeks you have this big thing and 2 weeks has gone by, he will scoop off the first batch, put it in a little jar and eat that, and then pack the rest down and put it back to ferment longer. Then in a week or so when that's done, he'll go in and week number 3 he'll get another batch. And so he kind of eats it as he goes, making sure that he packs it down. I just don't usually like the whole process of just getting it all cleaned up and packing it down again, so I usually just do it once, and then hence my mold situation, because if you don't pay enough attention and it's hot and your water evaporates, then the mold happens. So if I come back 5 weeks later, I haven't been paying attention. But if you're paying attention, you won't get the mold. You'll have liquid there still, and you'll be in good shape. And so you want to just leave it out as long as you want. And then when it's done, you want to pack it into whatever you want. You can pack it into mason jars like this. Usually I pack it, fairly tightly so there's not a lot of air in between. And try to kind of fill it up all the way so there's not a lot of air at the top. Put them in the fridge. You want to make sure that your refrigerator doesn't freeze. Sometimes if it's in the back or something that gets a little frozen, kind of changes the color and changes the texture a little bit. So just make sure you don't accidentally freeze it too much. But just keep it in a cool place in the fridge, and it'll last there for a good 4 months, 6 months. So you can make a big batch and just keep it in the fridge and eat it as you go, or eat it as you need it, or you can do the eat as you go method, whatever you prefer. Is there anything I'm forgetting?
Well, I just wanted to ask a question. So I know after 2 weeks, what we're eating is 2 weeks old. It could be on your counter 2 weeks to 2 months, 4 months. How long?
Yeah, Sandor says he's done, you could do 2 years if you wanted to. Okay. But the longest I've ever really done was 3 months, okay, just because I want to eat it by then. And I suppose there could be a point where it goes from crunchy to soft. Mm-hmm. So, but again, after 3 months, I haven't had mine turn soft. I really think it's because my kitchen is cool enough. I've never made soft sauerkraut. I don't really like soft sauerkraut. I think it has to do with the temperature, but also if you left it too long, it might get soft. So that's probably the distinction. A good, 2 2 weeks to 2 months, anywhere in there, you're going to end up with good sauerkraut.
Another question. If you,
Great question. So commercially produced sauerkraut typically is pasteurized, and so they often make it from a vinegar ferment, not from a true lactobacillus fermentation. If they do the lactobacillus fermentation, they often will cook it to to pasteurize it so that you don't have any of the good bacteria left, because they don't like bacteria, and so everything gets pasteurized. There are a few companies in California. We have several companies that make great sauerkraut. I don't know how, I know she's a local Berkeley company, so I don't know, but I use a company called Cultured, which is delicious. There's also Rejuvenate Foods, which is more around the country, but I'm not a fan of Rejuvenate Foods only because it's minced into literally like a spread type texture, and I just don't particularly like that texture myself. But there might be some. You want to look for a live or raw sauerkraut. That's what you want to look for if you buy it in the store, and you certainly can do that. It's just that this is so simple to make, and I'd like to tell people the concerns just so that you know what's good and what's not, what's bad. But once I saw somebody make it for the first time, I felt capable of making it, and I haven't had any problems since. And I'll tell you the other reason you want to make it yourself. A 1 pint jar is about $8 or $9. I can make an entire thing for about $10 or $12. So a fraction of the price, 15% of the price or something. So it makes a big difference when you're going through it or you have a whole family. You can make it a lot less expensively. But if you do buy it in the store, you just want to make sure it's raw, unpasteurized. You want to read on the label, it's got the live bacteria still there, those kinds of things.
The Rejuvenate, the only benefit though for dealing with children is because it is so small. It can be a little bit easier than something that's too large. I mean, kids like.
You could probably also hide it in things a lot more easily. And
so while you're waiting for this to ferment, to be done, you might want to try the Rejuvenate just to start introducing it and just to have a little bit of taste.
Now, which one I don't use them. Which flavor?
I like the red cabbage. That's my favorite.
Is it the one with the garlic?
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, I'm not a fan of the garlic in there. That was my challenge with it. But you can, if you like that, you can add garlic. But that is a great point, that if your kids don't like the texture, that might allow you that texture. You can hide in things. But be aware, if you put it in something like meatballs and then you cook it, you're going to kill the good bacteria.
Right.
You'll still get the good fermented cabbage. When you ferment something, the good bacteria creates vitamins, and you get about 5 times the vitamin C in sauerkraut than you do in the cabbage itself. So it's a really very nutritious food anyway, but you want to do it in its raw form if you want to get the good bacteria benefit, which is why most people do it. Do you have a question?
Yeah, is this the same as cultured vegetables?
Yes. This is cultured vegetables, fermented vegetables, raw sauerkraut, kimchi, any of those types of things are versions of the same thing.
Good.
In the recipe it says non-iodized sea salt.
Yes.
Is there some reason for that?
Well,
the question repeat.
yeah. Reason why not to use why to use non-iodized sea salt? Well, there's a variety of reasons. One is because I like to use a nutritive sea salt, and that's going to be something like. Do we have our salt? Something like this red salt or a gray salt or something like a Celtic sea salt or a Himalayan crystal salt, because you're going to get usually somewhere between 50 and 80 different trace minerals that are in there. And when you get an iodized salt, it's usually stripped white salt that adds iodine back in a form that's not really very helpful for the body. In fact, some people consider it pretty toxic for the system. So, if you need your iodine, you might want to look at kelp or some other way like that to get your iodine. You can even put sea vegetables in your cabbage if you wanted to. But just in general, and I'd love to hear their perspective, I always use a nutritive sea salt when I make mine. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
There was somebody had asked a question about the difference between Celtic and sea salt, and so Betsy and I wanted your point of view on that.
I use Himalayan crystal salt myself, so I know the most about that one. There's different type. Celtic sea salt is obviously sea salt that's been evaporated, and so you get all those rich minerals from the sea that are in it, and it's wonderful. I use a Himalayan crystal salt. The reason I use it is it's basically ancient seawater that was captured within, when the Himalayan mountains came up, captured inside and crushed into the mountain and creates these veins of salt in the mountain. So you're getting ancient sea salt, so it doesn't have any of the toxins, and it's hand milled and everything. So that's why I use it, because of the minerals that are in it and the pristine nature of it personally. I also like it for other reasons. There's other energetic qualities, if we want to talk quantum physics, about that salt, and that's one of the other reasons I like it. But just from a mineral perspective, you want to get something that's slightly gray, slightly green, slightly pink. That means your minerals are still in it. If you get a stripped white salt, that's not going to have any of those good nutrients. And I would guess that I don't know what would happen in the fermentation process if you used iodized. I don't know if it would affect it in a negative way. Ah. Well, that's why I use the Himalayan crystal salt, just because I know that there's not going to be mercury in that.
Iodized salt would have just as much.
Yeah.
Iodized salt would probably have more mercury than a sea salt would.
The other thing about stripped white salt is, look at your salt label when you get home. You'll see aluminum on it. Most cases are some sort of aluminum derivative or substance. Aluminum chloride or something. They always add. Often to keep it from caking, they dust every grain of salt with aluminum, and then because it tastes bitter, they dust every grain of salt with sugar. So I do not ever use regular table salt.
You guys have 45 more minutes.
Okay. Another question?
You can do that. If you want to keep it underwater, why don't you just add more water? You can absolutely do that. There's a couple little things, and we'll have this be the last question so that we can move on, but this is always my favorite part, so I'd like to spend some time on it. I usually like to just get the cabbage juice if I can, only because I know the proportion of salt and water. If you use too much salt, you'll inhibit the mold growth. If you use too much salt, you'll also inhibit the good bacteria growth. So I like to keep the proportion's good, but if you use the 1 tablespoon for the 1 cup, you'll keep that proportion. Absolutely, you can do that. It's just that sometimes I end up with my 1 gallon where there's only this much room left at the top after I pack it, and so I only can fit this much liquid, and my cabbage will often give me enough liquid that I don't need to add more water. So in a big container like that, you can absolutely add more water to it. Just sometimes I don't need to add more water. If you're concerned about it evaporating because it's hot or the mold or anything, you could just definitely add usually more water, but make sure it's the salt water so you get the right proportions, and then that's usually a good way to go. And let me start getting the other process done. If you have more questions on the sauerkraut, please feel free to write them down. Did we ever get any more of those question cards?
Yes, there's more question cards at the top.
Can you pass those out? I'll have Martin, my husband, pass out those question cards. If you have more questions on the sauerkraut, please write them down, and we can answer them during the Q&A.
Do you want to go to coconut? Because they don't have the stuff for
the salad's here. It'll just take a minute.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Salad dressing.
So another way, if you're thinking you're never going to get your kids to eat sauerkraut, first thought is, if your kids love sour things like lemon, they often love sauerkraut. And I have some kids in my practice that eat a half a cup of sauerkraut 2 or 3 times a day, and they love it. So consider it. But if you have really picky eaters, you're right, you're probably going to have some challenge with that. And so Susan and I put together Susan made it, a dressing recipe. Instead of using vinegar, we use some sauerkraut juice. And that's another way to get that good bacteria if your kids will eat salad, to incorporate it in. And so this is, I'll let you describe this part of the process.
Okay, I actually need a bowl, and I think we used our bowl for cabbage.
Yeah, you can use that.
Would we really care if there's a little cabbage? We don't.
No. There's cabbage already.
There's just a little cabbage in here, but I'm going to.
Salad dressing in general, please, it's one of the simplest things to make and one of the most toxic foods on the market because of the fact they use nothing but soy oil. In most cases, things like Kraft, it's all soy oils, and they use real bad vinegars, right? And then they use almost anything that Kraft makes is going to have MSG in it. So there's MSG in all commercial salad dressings, and so you have to. So it's so simple to make your own and so much more affordable.
Mm-hmm. So. And I guess it's another thing, growing up with a dad who was a chef, we never had a bottled salad dressing ever. I found it. I sent our wonderful volunteers back to the kitchen looking for the sauerkraut juice, and it was here all along. anyway, I always make my own salad dressings. But the quality of ingredients of how you make this really makes a difference. And you want some flavor in there. Typically what I do, it's like 1 part vinegar, acid, whatever that would be. You could have lemon juice, you could have sauerkraut juice, and 3 parts oil. You can adjust that to your taste. If you wanted a little sweeter, you could add a little agave if you wanted something a little bit sweeter. If you want other flavors, you could make a Mexican version by adding some chili seasoning. You could make an Asian version, adding a little 5 spice to it, a little ginger to go with that. More Italian, you might use a balsamic vinegar versus, or an Asian, you might use a rice vinegar. So all you have to know is the basic ratio, and then you can mix up anything you want. I like to add some seasoning to it, and what I'm going to make for us, I use some herbes de Provence that I got from Penzeys, and it's just a wonderful, fragrant blend that includes lavender and rosemary and I think tarragon and what else? Thyme. Fennel. It's just wonderful, I think. So you'll see what you do. And I'm putting some spices in there, dried. You could use fresh. If you used fresh, you'd put them in at the end. I'm going to use Dijon mustard. Is that all right? I like that. And I'm an eyeball cooker, so I'm just going to, I put about a teaspoon in, and I'm going to put a little salt in. I want salt grinder. So we're doing all this before. The last thing that you're going to add is the oil. You never want to add the oil to the end because you want it to make a nice emulsified liquid that doesn't separate. So now I'm going to add some of the sauerkraut juice, and you can tell the color is this pale orange because it was the sauerkraut with the carrots in it. So you can vary your color. Very noisy, whisking this together just to get those ingredients. The last thing that you do is take the oil and you drizzle that in slowly. When you drizzle it in, that's how you get the emulsion. And I know you can't see it, but I'll show you after I get it mixed up. Need my left hand because I'm left-handed. Okay, so when you do this, you start to get I'm not done. You start to get more of a liquid that holds together instead of that really watery liquid. I'm going to add a little bit more oil to it. A fast and easy cheater's way that I do occasionally is you could do this in your blender, and it's going to emulsify right away, and you don't have to worry about that, and it's not going to separate totally. I mean, you'll make it, keep it in the refrigerator. It might separate a little bit, but really not very much. And the only way you know it's any good is if you taste it, so. So I will. Then you know, do I need to adjust the acid? Do I want to add a little more acid, a little more oil? Oh, it's really good, but I want to add more so you taste more of the sauerkraut. Clean spoon that I can.
Can you put it back in here so then I can?
Yeah. I've got squirt bottles.
Squirt bottle?
Oh. Is it around?
Perfect. That's what they were for. I was wondering.
Using the other end of the spoon, not to give you my cooties.
Do you have a funnel?
Well, that would be easy, but no.
But why don't you want to try put it in here first, and then I'll put it in the squirt bottle.
I didn't. I didn't put honey in it, but you could if you wanted it a little bit sweeter. Here, I'll do it over this.
Good, I'm glad you're.
Pardon me? I didn't add that in this one. If you like your dressing to be a little sweeter, you certainly could do that, but you don't have to. I'm sorry? I did add the mustard. I did add the mustard. Pardon me? I added a little bit. I'll get some more. But you can see how nice and rich it is, and I didn't obviously have a blender, just my trusty whisk.
Thank you.
Another thing that Julie had mentioned that I thought was such a great idea is adding sauerkraut right to your salad. You know, just another vegetable, another crunch, another layer of flavor that you add in there is really wonderful. Just a little bit more.
Okay, so while they go ahead and serve that to you, I will go ahead and get started with a little bit of the next recipe, which is the coconut date balls. These are great as a dessert or as a little snack. They're certainly sweet, and they make a good dessert. If you really had a yeast issue, you may have a challenge, but it's definitely SCD compliant. And there's the great coconut. There's actually coconut butter in here as well as coconut oil, so you get a lot of those good coconut fats we talked about. And so it's really easy to do. You are just going to take a few ingredients here. You're going to take some dates. You can take date paste, but I just buy dates. And I pit them myself, but these were already pitted. So you just, you have your dates. You throw them in. These are, you can use any, whole date without any additives to it. You just dump your dates in there. As well, you're going to add coconut. So this coconut spread is the same thing as what some people call coconut butter, which is right there. And it's just like peanut butter or any butter where it's the whole coconut meat ground up to form this butter, whereas coconut oil is the oil pressed out of the coconut meat. So you're going to get more, it's this texture right here, a more creamy texture, and that really is the key, I think, to the good flavor of these. And then you can add some shredded coconut pieces if you want. It's up to you. You can put them inside or you can just roll them on top, but I always put some inside. And then
this is the coconut we used.
Oh, great. That's the coconut we used. And then what you're going to do is just, you can use the lemon or the orange zest, but if you have a citrus issue, you can just eliminate that part. I did not use that in this, just not knowing who my audience would be. And normally what you're going to do is you're going to take your coconut oil and you're going to lightly melt it beforehand. You don't want to be simmering it on the stove, but usually I'll melt it, put it in a little glass jar or cup and melt it in a larger heated type of a container. But we don't need to do that right now because this is pretty simple and I just want to show you the process more than anything. And then, do we have the lid?
What?
The lid. Here.
Sorry.
That's right. All right. And then we're just going to blend it all up. Sorry. Thanks. All right. And let's see if we,
It's not on.
I'm on my way.
Sorry.
Aha. All right. So then you just, you can pulse these one at a time. So in theory, you would take the dates and you would blend them first, and then you would add the coconut spread in. But we... All right, and then you end up with, you can kind of see here, kind of just like a little crumbly mixture of everything all put together. And then we're just going to imagine for right now that this is melted. And then as you go, you're just going to put a little of the melted coconut oil in. And what that's going to do is help press it all together. So that kind of little bit hot melted coconut oil will make it into much more of a thin, kind of less chunky paste. And then you just blend that again. And then all you do is roll these into little balls. And then You can make it fancy or not fancy. You could just do it like this, but what I often do is if you want to roll it in, if you want to get a little melted coconut oil and roll it in the coconut oil just to kind of get that hot coconut oil on there, and then you're going to roll it in your little coconut, your dried coconut flakes here, and then you end up with your little balls like that. You could just eat them like this, but when you put them in the refrigerator, they firm up. That coconut oil and everything gets a little firm, and so they have a really nice texture to them. And so that's the coconut balls, and that's all there is to it. It's very simple, and they're really, really delicious.
And you'll be sampling them momentarily.
Yes. Okay.
After you finish your salad.
First the salad, then the ball, right, Betsy?
That's right. We've incorporated, especially the second half, we've done a lot more raw. And I know a lot of people are questioning, why don't you do all raw or things such as that. But I think all of us are kind of in agreement that a combination of raw and cooked foods is important for our diet. If you do all raw and nothing cooked, digestion can be an issue for a lot of people. And if they have a really irritated colon, they may not be able to digest constantly all raw foods. Yes? Yes. I'm sorry, it's all about soaking things, grains as well. Right, and we appreciate that, but in the interest of, there is the piece of the raw diet which we definitely understand, but it's also extremely time consuming, and we really are trying to help the families be able to make a meal quickly, relatively, and to kind of take it to that step, and all of the soaking and all those other processes, but not to be able to do some of the meats that, like we talked about, the meatloaf and things like that, those are all, we feel, important pieces for a lot of the kids as well. No, it's not killing all nutrition, because the enzymes will survive to a certain point. And yes, you will break off some enzymes over time, but you will not completely destroy all of your enzymes if you're cooking it briefly. Now, yeah, if you go back to the days where our grandmothers took green beans and they cooked them for an hour until they were just sautéed mush, yeah, you are going to destroy the nutrition, but you can cook things and get nutrition. You want to hit this?
What was the question? Okay, so there's two issues here. He was asking about raw foods, and raw foods are great, and the enzymes in raw foods are really wonderful, and as Betsy said, it's really important and helpful to get some of your foods raw. However, certain foods are, and in theory, the raw food people say that if you have the enzymes in your food, you don't need your own enzymes. But there are certain foods that don't digest very well raw, things like cruciferous vegetables, cabbage, broccoli, those kinds of things you really want either fermented or cooked in order to get more nutrients. And if you are really healthy, that diet often works really well. But when you have someone with a compromised digestion, it's a little too much work for the digestive system to have to do all of that work themselves. So a combination of some of that cooked food and some of the raw food really kind of provides a nice variety of some of the fresh enzymes in your meal to help digest some of the other cooked food. So kind of a combination of the two of those. And while you'll destroy the enzymes above 118 degrees, you're not going to destroy all the vitamins and minerals. In fact, in some cases, you're going to make some of them more available for you. And so there's two components to that. Yeah. Yes. 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 So she was asking, the coconut spread, I buy it that way. So it's already in some sort of a jar. I actually have a health food store that sells it in bulk. So I just buy it that way. And I buy the coconut oil that way too. And I just buy those ingredients and put them together. Those, I buy those in bulk as well from my health food store. Yeah. I have a really great holistic store that has bulk that's very fresh and turns over frequently, and so nice fresh coconut without any sulfites or anything added to it. All of the coconut and the date balls is definitely SCD legal. Yes.
I'll get it. You need an egg, one egg.
I use whole dates in this one. So when you say SCD legal, this is, you want to use the whole dates. You don't want to use any of those little date pieces that might have other flours or things in the processing. But if you use whole, fresh, whole dried dates that you get at the store, I just cut them and pit them. And these were already pitted for me. So, and then I just blended them in the food processor till I created my own paste out of them. Great. Do you have the balls? Did you try the balls yet? Oh, good. Yeah, those are my favorite. When I made those, I couldn't stop eating them. I make them very small so you can have a couple of them because they're really good. And then the crunchy outside, it's kind of nice to have a couple of them. So, okay.
The egg is on its way.
The egg is on its way.
All right.
So
we're going to next make some nutcrackers. And these are great for gluten-free, and they're also great for SCD. So if you can do nuts and you're on SCD, this is the way you get your crackers when you normally can't use grains for crackers. And I have to say, the one little bit challenging thing about SCD is that you sort of don't get all those great grain-based crackers and cookies and things like that our pickiest eaters certainly have in their diet and would like a substitute for. And all of us kind of enjoy having a little bit of that texture to put something on top of or those sorts of things. So that's where the nutcracker recipe came from. And in this case, I use cashew flour, and you can see it's also very finely powdered, thanks to my husband who spent time yesterday sifting through all of it. And he's the one that discovered the coffee grinder was the best way to go. And so the secret to this recipe is having plenty of extra nut flour to use to flour the pan, to flour the surface you're going to be rolling this out on. So you're going to start with 2 cups of the raw cashews, or the cashew flour, which is right here. And you know what I could use? Do we have another bowl? Because this is actually the extra flour. Okay. And I actually, you know what? Need. Yeah, yes. Okay.
You want me to go get parchment?
So I've measured out some flour ahead of time, as well as my baking soda and my salt over here. And you can use any kind of oil, but I tend to use a lot of coconut oil, and some people are sensitive to coconut, so you don't have to use it. In this case, I used grapeseed oil so that you could have another alternative than that. And then when my egg arrives, it's on its way. Thank you. Okay, and then, thanks. I'm just trying to think. Oh, you know what I'll do? I'm just going to... You know what I'll do? I'll dump some of my flour out here on the side. Maybe make a little bit of a mess, but I like to make a mess in my kitchen when I cook, so I'll just do that here as well. So I'll have that on the side ready to go, and then I'll pour my nut flour, in this case, cashew flour. I've made this recipe only with cashew flour in the past, but I would imagine you could probably make it with any flour. Cashews, though, have a nice texture to them, so you might want to experiment and see what works best. Then I add my baking soda and salt, and I kind of mix it all together. And then I go ahead and I add my egg, as well as my oil, and about a tablespoon in this case. Great. All right. And then I'm going to mix all this together, and you'll see what texture it turns into here. Oops. I'm going to use a little more oil here. Just pour a little, All right. So what you want this, I tend to not use a recipe often as well. What you want this texture to be is you don't want it to be too wet, but you do want it to be wet enough that it forms into a dough and all of the liquid gets incorporated in. So let me mix this and I'll show you what it turns out to be. And I probably should have had a glove, but we'll just go with this. Okay, so then you're going to end up with something that's kind of this kind of a texture. You know, you can pick it up and you can make it into a bit of a ball, and then you're going to spread some flour onto your surface here, and that's really the key because this is a little more oily than, and if you don't, it'll end up sticking. So I usually use a little flour, use a little bit of my cashew flour, turn it over a few times, kind of coat this top surface a little bit here. Okay, so then what you often do, but I'm not going to do it here because you can get the gist of it, is that I then roll it out with a rolling pin into a very, very thin texture or thin thickness, probably about, 1/8 of an inch or so in thickness. And then once you do that, then you just cut it into whatever size pieces that you want, and you put it on some sort of a baking parchment, and bake it in your oven. Now here's the secret. You can very easily burn them, which I've done before. So I usually do a little bit lower heat, and then I do that a shorter period of time. I look at them at maybe 8 minutes and just make sure they're okay. They usually take about 10 to 13 minutes, depending on what kind of oven and exactly what heat you have it on, but just err on the side of a little bit less brown until you kind of see how they're coming, and then you can go ahead and just cook them a little bit longer. And you can see they've got a good crispness to them. They've got a cracker texture, and you can make them whatever size you want. Usually rolling them fairly thin is helpful, but you can add nut. You can make your own nut butter and add those to it. You can just have them plain. You can add a little honey to them, and you can actually make them like a cookie. So it just depends on what you want to do with them and how you're going to be using them. So that's those. Yeah. Those, mine never last long enough.
Repeat the question.
How long do you store them? Do you have any idea how long in general you might store something like that?
I wouldn't store them longer than a month. I'd obviously put them in an airtight case and keep them for about a month. You could probably freeze them and keep them for a couple of months, but I have the same problem. Whenever I make a cookie or a cracker, it doesn't last long. Yes? What was the question?
Oh, what would you replace the egg with in this recipe? I think I have an answer for that one. I adapted this from Pecan Bread's website, but changed quite a few ingredients. When I tried to make theirs, I found that it didn't give me the same crispiness I liked. Theirs didn't actually have egg. So if you go to the Pecan website and you look up, I think it's Sandy's Crackers, you'll see their recipe, and they use a little bit of orange juice, which I didn't want to use because of the citrus. They use a different type of oil than I used, and they don't use the egg. So in theory, you could do that, although when I made them that way, I could not get them. They were just crumbly. They didn't have any texture to them. So you might want to just try the original recipe and see if you can get those to work. Otherwise, they're mostly, what do you think, that in this case the egg is mostly a binder? Or
The egg is definitely a binder.
So what do you think might be a good substitute for that?
You could use the flax.
So that flax that we described earlier might be a good way to try. All right, great. So our last recipe here is the soda. And this is one of the fermented things that we had kind of talked about a little bit earlier when I was talking about fermented foods. We talked about 2 fermented drinks that were gluten-free, dairy-free, SED compliant, and fermented, and they were the kombucha and the soda. So today we're going to make the soda, since you can most likely go to the store and buy the kombucha. If you do want to try kombucha, I'm assuming that it's available in all areas. We use the Synergy or the GTS brand, which is the same brand, but the Synergy I think has 5% fruit juice, whereas the GTS is just the regular straight kombucha, if I recall correctly. Though that brand is a raw type of a kombucha that you find in your refrigerated section. And so that might be a good way to try it and get involved with it, see if your kids like it. They're probably not, well, I don't know if they'll like the original flavor. I was going to say they probably won't like the original flavor. I personally find it a little vinegary. So I like their ginger flavor or their fruit flavors. But when you make it yourself, you can adjust how vinegary it gets. And so, but it'll give you a place to start and something to try. And then if you want to make that, you'll want to get a culture, a kombucha culture later. And there's more information on that on my website. I have some recipes, and there is an explanation of how to make that as well. But today we're going to make the soda because this soda is a little, I guess, sweeter and more kind of what most kids would like. It uses several things. It uses 2 types of herbal tea. So it's not really tea, it's more like dried herbs. This is a hibiscus leaf, and this is rose hips. Really wonderful antioxidants, tons of vitamin C, and really very good. And it makes this beautiful punch-colored tea. And so what you first do is that you basically brew a tea from these two teas, and then you're going to add the rest of the ingredients, including the some sort of a sweetener. But I want to talk about the sweetener because that's a key piece of it. If you want it to be SCD compliant, you'd want to use honey. If you don't need it to be SCD compliant, you could use pretty much any sweetener, although this recipe uses agave, and that's what I usually use. We're still trying to figure out if agave is SCD legal. It's about 90% fructose and the rest glucose, which are 2 monosaccharides, but I don't know if they're combined into a disaccharide or not, and I'm still trying to figure that out. I also don't know if the fermentation process changes the structure and ferments it out into something slightly different. So for now, if you're strict SCD legal, you probably want to stick with honey. If you're not strictly SCD legal, you could use agave or whatever you'd like to use. And so you are going to firstly brew the tea, add the lemon, and you're going to add the kefir grains. And these are the kefir grains.
Pulled some out.
All right. I don't know if you can see those, the little clear, kind of the clear light pink ones. There's some tea mixed in there, but you can kind of see, and maybe we can even, let's see if we can get a whole bunch of them here. You can sort of see the majority of, there's some tea leaves in there, but you can see the majority of those kind of translucent little things in there. Those are water kefir grains. Now there's dairy kefir and there's water kefir. Dairy kefir are these big white milky globule things that you use to ferment dairy products. You can also ferment any of these drinks with those as well, but the water kefir grains are specifically used to ferment kind of sweet waters or sweet liquids. So you can use them to ferment your coconut juice or your coconut water. You can use them to do anything where you're going to have water with some sweetness to it. So that's what we're using here. And then you're going to add those kefir grains, and you're going to keep it in a warm place for a couple days. Then you're going to add some more things to the process here, transfer it, and then ferment it for a couple more days. The directions are all here, and it's fairly simple and easy to do. But what you're going to want to look for at the end is a drink, again, that's fizzy and kind of, it's going to be sweet, but you want it to kind of, again, be a little sweet sour. So you're going to want some of that agave nectar, some of those sugars to be fermented out and processed by the kefir and transformed into all sorts of good compounds, including things that are good for the gut. And so that's really the process. Now, one thing to just be aware of is I made this one time and I wasn't really paying attention, and I basically fermented it too long, and to me it tasted like cough syrup. So just make sure that when you do any fermented things that you're kind of checking it as you go, because if it goes too long, it's just going to end up being overly fermented and either vinegary or medicinal in some quality. So you want to get it right in that sort of sweet sour space. Too sweet is too much sugar. Too sour, often not particularly delicious, especially for kids.
That means it hasn't fermented long enough. This is another one of those experiments that Julie had me do, and I had never done this, and I needed to find water kefir grains, and it's not something that you go to the grocery store and say, can I have some water kefir grains? They did not have any, so there are some sources on the internet, and we can talk more about that afterwards. I did order some, and they came in my little cups, and I added them, and they were a little pricey. I got 2 cups full, about this size, of water grains, and they weren't pink at the time because the pink is from the rosehips and the hibiscus. And I thought, gosh, that's really expensive, because I made 1 gallon. It required 2 of these little cups of water kefir grains that I want to say cost me like $40, $45. However, you use them forever and ever. So I will strain them out, and then you'll use them again. And they actually grow and multiply, and you will have them forever. So it's you buy it once and you use it for a gazillion times. But my thought was, $45 for a gallon of fuzzy soda or fizzy soda? I don't think so. So just so you know that. And if one of you starts some water kefir grains, you could share them with your friends. As they grow and they multiply, then you pass some on to other people, or I know some people that grow them and then sell them to others. But I found an internet source, and that's how we did it.
Great.
How do you store them after you've used them?
You store them. We strained them out already, and I just have them in a little water in here, and they don't go in the refrigerator. They just stay at room temperature. But what I will do when I get home is strain all this out and sort of rinse them off, and then keep them in a jar until I make my next batch.
With water.
With water.
And with all sorts of these fermented cultures, you need to kind of keep them going. So they will stay on the counter and they will stay in water, but eventually they need food, or like anything, they won't make it. So you want to kind of just keep batches going. So you don't have to keep them going continually, but if you're not going to make these more than once a month, or then it may not be the drink for you. You might want to make kombucha or something else. So just be aware that you can definitely use them over and over, but you do need to kind of keep them going. So you don't want to leave them sitting too long.
And by keeping them going, you mean making like this recipe or some other recipe?
Correct.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So you just keep them fermenting. And I have some, and I do not use I have probably half the amount that Sueson has, and I make a big thing, and they're potent, so I can make the same. Even though they say to use a half a cup, I probably use about a quarter of a cup, and mine just turns out just fine. So you could probably go with the $20 batch instead of the $40 batch and be good. Also, I ended up getting mine from somebody that belonged to a Weston A. Price member of mine that we were in the same San Francisco chapter. So you may find someone that has them, although they are a little difficult to grow and multiply, so sometimes it's a little bit hard for them to come by. You can, like I said, you could use dairy kefir grains, but that's only if you don't have a dairy issue. Otherwise, they would be tainted with dairy. So for most people, if you can get the water kefir grains. And I just wanted to mention the whey. Whey is from dairy, so if you can't do dairy at all, then you're not going to want to use whey, but that's another way to do it, and that's really inexpensive. You just basically strain yogurt, and the liquid that comes out is the whey, and you probably could use our almond whey this morning. I just haven't done it that way, but in theory, anything that's going to have that good bacteria fermentation would do this process for you as well.
And you can do other things with those kefir grains. It's like you don't have to keep making fizzy drinks. You could make coconut kefir. There are lots of good, healthy drinks and liquids that you could use for other recipes, right?
Definitely. The body ecology diet's really big. If you've heard of the young green coconut water kefir, she uses that. She uses a powdered starter, but these are basically, talk about inexpensive over time, those are little packets for, say, $30, and once you use them a few times, you have to throw them out, and so you have to keep spending that money, whereas this one will
and they're not casein-free.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, because we were going to buy the body ecology and found that they weren't.
Okay.
So we're going to sample this.
We're going to sample it. And while they are doing that and passing around our last recipe of the day before we go to Q&A, any questions on the fermented soda? That is dairy-free. That is that. As long as you don't use the yogurt whey, if you use if you use these water kefir grains, you're in good shape, and there is definitely no casein in there. And again, they would be both gluten and casein-free as well as SCD if you use the honey instead of the agave. Yeah, agave nectar you just buy that way, and we mentioned it a little bit at the very beginning about some other types of sweeteners that you can use that often have some good properties to them, and agave comes from cactus, and so it's often a good one that people use. You just buy it in a little container. Again, you're not going to probably find it at your conventional grocery store, but any health food store should have it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can squeeze it in and then you can just dump the whole thing in there. Yeah, so you're going to get the juice and then you're going to just put the whole lemon in.
I need to try one too.
How do you recover them? Well, I do mine a little bit differently. What I do is I ferment it, put the lemon in there. I brew the tea, put the lemon in, and then I strain out the tea. Then I put the grains in, so then all I do is strain the liquid and just have the grains. In this case, top and most of the grains were on the bottom, so we skimmed off the grains. We skimmed off the tea, and then most of the grains were at the bottom, but you can see that there's still some tea and stuff in there. So I usually strain mine ahead of time. Or I guess you could put them in a little, like one of those little tea bags, those kind of cloth tea bags, so you could keep them a little separated.
Well, she's doing that. Can we talk about tea in general for
Sure.
a little bit? Because I think that we are all big on pushing water and getting water down these kids, and we don't want them having juice because of all the sugars involved in it. We don't want them having, obviously, soda or things such as that. So tea is something that you can use to really help kind of perk up the taste of something for a beverage. And there are many, many different types, and there are some that are extremely sprayed, so organic is obviously the better way to go. But to do some good herbal teas, I mean, can be really beneficial for the antioxidant level. And then there's also teas that you've heard a lot about green tea. Now, your basic Lipton package is going to be a black tea, very, very sprayed leaf, very processed, not going to have much of anything into it. But then you have up from there antioxidant levels. You have up from there, you have green tea, which also has some good antioxidants in it. And then up from there, you have white tea, which even has a higher antioxidant level. And then up from there, you have a tea called rooibos, and it's spelled Rooibos.
I think so.
And rooibos can be more of a red tea, and that is even the highest of all of antioxidants. And if you're looking for some good tea sources, you can certainly get them all around. I love, and although they do have some organic and some not organic, Teavana. It's Teavana is the name of their website, teavana.com. They have a location in Schaumburg here. They have one in Northbrook, I believe.
They have them everywhere. They're from coast to coast. They're on the East
okay,
Coast
good,
and West Coast.
Good. And they have just some magnificent, wonderful tea. If you, especially anybody here, is trying to get off a soda, is trying to get off a coffee, get yourself excited to get up in the morning and get something really tasty to drink. And then if you need to sweeten it up a little bit, we've talked about a lot of good natural sweeteners that you can use to sweeten it up a little bit. Fresh lemon juice squeezed into it. Anything else you want to add about the tea?
No, except another good pick-me-up in the morning, if in addition, is kombucha.
Yes.
If you're okay with a cold drink in the morning, a lot of times the hot beverage is particularly nice, but kombucha also, without the caffeine kick, tends to definitely give people some energy.
That's great. That's great. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yerba mate is great. The only negative thing for kids, it's very high in caffeine. Yerba mate. It's as much caffeine as coffee.
It seems to be somehow processed differently, so it doesn't affect everybody the same way, but possibly for kids it could be too much. It's also
I love yerba mate, though. It's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Very good. And there was one more thing I was thinking.
So we still have a lot of people.
Kombucha. So that was one of the fermented drinks we didn't make today, but it's KOMBUCHA. And that's the one I mentioned this morning that's made with black tea and sugar that's fermented out by this yeast and bacteria culture. It's a little bit weird, but you know what? Sometimes kids really love all that weird kind of science experiment stuff. I know I do. I think it's really fun. And so you might be able to really get them involved, and it might be it's like kind of like the whole concept of bugs and worms, and you know they get excited about all that stuff. And kombucha is definitely one of those. It's got definitely got a culture on top, which is a little funny looking, but very easy to do, very difficult to mess up. Someone had asked a question earlier about what if my child is, I think, sensitive to yeast or something like that. So while these yeast ferments, the things like the kefir or the kombucha, have some of that good yeast that kills bad yeast, if you're really yeast sensitive, you're probably going to want to avoid the yeast ferments and stick with just the bacterial ferments like the yogurt or the sauerkraut. Just because, you know, if you're highly sensitive to yeasts, it's possible that even those good yeasts are creating some reaction for you.
That's a good answer. Why don't we take a break? You want to take a break now?
Yes.
And just say 15 minutes?
Yeah.
It's 20 till, so at 5 to 4.
Great.
We're going to take a quick 15-minute break now, and when you come back, we're going to do our Q&A. So it is 20 minutes before 4 o'clock. Please be back in the room at 5 to 4. We have a stack of questions, and anybody that has any additional questions, now is the time to turn in those little cards, and we'll be happy to answer them. Thanks a lot.